Welcome, everyone, to Lone Star Spirit, your one stop place for all things Texas history and current events. As many of you know, we are rapidly approaching hurricane season. And right now, we are also in the tornado season. Tornado Alley has awoken and it has been rather busy for tornadoes this spring, and it's unfortunately I think it's going to continue to produce a lot of tornadoes for the remainder of the season. But we are going to be talking about hurricanes, and this is going to be a multiple episode type of project aspect of the channel because hurricanes have a long history along the Texas Gulf Coast. And I would like to spotlight at least some of those storms that have affected the Texas Gulf Coast. We're going to start off with the 1900 storm of Galveston. We're going to go all the way through and look at Hurricane Harvey. Now, what's interesting, at least to me, is that both of those storms at the time of landfall were Category 4 storms. And there may be some questions as to how is that determined, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in this introductory episode for this hurricane series. But before we do that, I think it would be a great idea to go ahead and try to get a little bit of the history as it pertains to the tracking of these storms. Nowadays, we've got all kinds of satellite imagery. We've got reconnaissance aircraft that the Air Force sends up. We've got radar, weather stations, buoys in the ocean. We've got a whole plethora of ways to track these storms and get people notified when these storms are going to hit, where they're going to hit. We can even track it once it has actually made landfall, which is really, really awesome and amazing. But how did they do it back in the day, back in the 1800s, back in the 1900s? And that's a very good question, and it's something I feel that we do need to discuss and just kind of get an idea of how that was done. And we're also going to talk about this the scale that's used to determine the category of these hurricanes, and it's a great tool to use to alert the people in the path of these storms to get the heck out of Dodge and go for higher ground, get out of town, go somewhere where this hurricane is not going to go. And we've got a lot of information to cover over these next few episodes, and I am super excited about this because I have a somewhat morbid fascination with severe weather. Yes, I'm the guy that goes outside when it's thundering and lightning and raining. I jump in my car. If there's a chance for a tornado, in the past, I would get in my car and try to find a tornado. And I haven't done it in a long time, mostly because I do not have a CB radio in my car or anything like that. But I wouldn't put it past myself to do it again if the situation presented itself. But regardless, let's go ahead and get into a little bit of the history of tracking these hurricanes back in the day. Now, one thing that did happen is these storms, there's been recorded in history hurricanes all the way up and down the east coast of the United States, and of course in the Gulf of Mexico and the states that line up along the Gulf of Mexico. There has been attempts to track these storms, and it seems like the first one that really had any kind of actual success with it, I guess is the word I'm trying to think of here, was back in 1821. And it was a hurricane that hit New York. The individual, I believe his name was William Redfield, he actually traced it back from the time that it hit. He traced it back and kind of came up with what the track probably was. And that just kind of set up how we do these today. We've got to start somewhere, and 1821 was just as good a start as anywhere else. Before that, there really was no advanced warning. People were taken by surprise by a lot of these storms. They may have seen it on the horizon, and these hurricanes look absolutely just terrifying when you see them coming over the horizon. So you may have had maybe an hour or two before a hurricane actually came in. The actual brute force of these hurricanes actually came and made landfall. You didn't have a whole lot of time. Now we can have up to a week to get things situated, get prepared, get out of town, hunker down, whatever you choose to do. And I think that we have made a massive improvements in our ability to track these storms and get these warnings out. So in the early 20th century, we had a little bit more of a technological breakthrough. We became a little bit better at tracking and forecasting these storms. 1940s come around, we start using radar. We had that technology, and we could actually track them a lot better. We still had a long way to go, but we could do a little bit better job and get people to safety. 1950s roll around, we start using aircraft, and they could go in and gather data on things like temperature and barometric pressure, wind speed, all this kind of good stuff. And they could actually go up several times a day and get a pretty good idea of where the storm was going before it actually made landfall. And it just improved our ability to get that information out to the people that were going to be affected by these storms. And it really wasn't until the 1960s and 1970s that we had weather satellites that went up and were actually able to take pictures of the cloud cover and actually see the hurricane in what became known as satellite imagery. You could see how big or how small, how compact the eye wall was, all this great stuff. Now, as of today, of course, we've got the National Hurricane Center. We've got the Severe Storms Laboratory. They do all this great stuff. National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. They're all involved in tracking severe storms, whether they be on land or over sea. With all of that said, it's amazing what we can do with technology now. But one thing that that I feel kind of needs to be said is a lot of times when you're listening to weather reports, especially during hurricane season, and there's an acronym that a lot of meteorologists on the TV like to use, and it's the MDR. And what the MDR is it is the main development region. And for the Atlantic, it is right in an area that comes from Western Africa and goes almost straight across all the way towards the Yucatan Peninsula. So that covers pretty much the southern part of the Northern Hemisphere. And this is typically where we start to see these storms that come off of the west coast of Africa start to gain strength and get a little bit more organized and turn into tropical depressions, tropical storms. And if there's enough instability in the air, there's not a lot of wind shear, The conditions are right. The water temperature is warm enough and it can draw energy off of the water. These storms can actually turn into hurricanes. And what I've done is I've gone ahead and put a picture of the MDR, or the main development region, on the screen as well, so you can get an idea. Instead of me just describing it, you can actually see where the MDR is. And that's a very important area to pay attention to, especially once hurricane season does start. And again, I want to reiterate that the first couple of months, relatively quiet. You may have some tropical depressions, some tropical storms come out, but typically, as the temperatures during the summer continue to rise, of course, the water temperature is going to also continue to rise. And typically, here in Texas, we always say that August is the hottest month of the year, and typically that has been true. So that's why you start to see a spike in August all the way through October. And hurricane season is from June 1st to November 30th. So that's a long stretch of time that the water can become more warm. Conditions are more favorable for the development of these tropical depressions, tropical storms, and into hurricanes. Another thing that you may hear about is the Saffir-Simpson Scale. And this is what a lot of meteorologists will use to classify these hurricanes. And there's tropical depressions, tropical storms, category 1 through category 5 when it comes to hurricanes. And I've also put that on the screen as well. And that's just something that I think is also very, very, very important when it comes to knowing what's going on. So you can see here, tropical depression, or the TD, is 0 to 38 miles per hour, and that's your maintained wind speed. Those are not gusts. This is a steady wind speed. There's typically not a surge or anything like that. Then you move up to the tropical storm when your wind speeds, your sustained wind speeds, reach 39 miles an hour, and then up to 73 miles an hour. Now, do not take for granted that it's just called a tropical storm. There have been tropical storms that have caused millions and millions of dollars in damages, and also led to, unfortunately, the loss of life. And we will be discussing at least one or two tropical storms that have hit the Texas Gulf Coast in this series. Then we get into the actual hurricanes. Now, this is where it gets a little bit more exciting. Category 1 is from 74 to 95 miles an hour. Now, if you've ever been in a wind that's over 50 miles an hour, you know, it can knock you down off your feet. It can blow your hat off. It can cause damage to structures, blow patio furniture around, cause limbs to fall out of trees, and all kinds of damage can be done. So imagine a 74 to 95 mile an hour gust, or sustained wind, coming off the Gulf Coast. Now, here's where we get into the little bit more of the scientific aspect of this. Typically, in a category 1 storm, as you can see here, it's the millibars, or the low pressure that's there, is 980 to 994. So the lower the millibars, typically the stronger the hurricane is. And usually with a category 1 storm, you're going to have a 4 to 5 foot storm surge. That is the water coming up out of the ocean at the shore. It's coming up at an additional 4 to 5 feet. Now, with any of these, whether it be a category 1 or a category 5, the timing of the landfall of the hurricane can be made worse. The surge can be made worse if you are at high tide. So that's whatever the high tide is. If the hurricane comes in at high tide, you're going to add whatever the storm surge is. Now, as you can see, category 2, 96 to 110 miles an hour. We're talking big time winds, 6 to 8 foot storm surge. This is still considered a minor hurricane. Now we get into the major hurricanes, category 3 through 5. So, category 3, 111 miles an hour to 129 miles an hour. And you're talking a storm surge of 9 to 12 feet with the millibars with the low pressure system anywhere from 945 to 964. Category 4, which is what the 1900 Galveston hurricane and Hurricane Harvey were at the time of landfall, 130 to 156 miles per hour, with the low pressure millibars being at 920 to 944. 13 to 18 foot storm surge. Category 5, which is considered catastrophic, 157 plus miles an hour with a greater than 18 foot storm surge. That water is going very far inland, and especially here where we're at in the Houston area, the Houston metropolitan area, there's a lot of low-lying areas here. The land is pretty much flat, and it pretty much stays flat until you get into central Austin County when you start running into a little bit of some hills there. But so we're talking anywhere from just east of the Beaumont area all the way down to the tip of Texas there around like McAllen and Brownsville is very, very flat. Counties like Brazoria County, Harris County, Galveston County, and Matagorda County, there's not a lot of hills or any kind of anything to break up that water coming in onshore. So that is something to be very, very mindful of, and you should really be paying attention to what's going on as these storms continue to develop and move toward our locations along the Gulf Coast. Pay attention to what category the hurricanes are. So I do want to go back just for a little bit and go back to that MDR, the main development regions. What makes this area prime for development of tropical storms into hurricanes is the water is just can get insanely warm. We're talking temperature, water surface temperature being anywhere from 80 to 95 degrees. And typically our body temperature is 98.6 degrees. So it's just a couple of degrees lower than our actual body temperature. So that's pretty warm, and just the fact that these storms can come off of the western coast of Africa and just look like a bit of unorganized, just maybe just a nasty thunderstorm or a complex of nasty thunderstorms within days, within even several hours. These storms in the MDR can go from a band of unorganized storms and come together, and you can actually start to see rotation around the center of an eye. And typically when they start really getting concerned and paying more attention is when you really start to see a defined eye in a hurricane, or they can determine where the low is in that tropical depression or tropical storm, and really start to see where that center of rotation is at, even though an eye has not yet formed. So we have to be very vigilant starting June 1st, excuse me, starting June 1st all the way through the end of November. We need to stay vigilant, keep an eye on your weather. And if you're like me, you probably don't really watch a whole lot of local news. I know I don't, but when it comes to hurricane season, pick a channel. I don't care what it is. Make sure that you're taking time to at least be aware of what is going on in the tropics, in that main development region, so you can keep an eye on what's going on. And if you need to make preparations to leave, hunker down, again, whatever you decide to do, make sure you're staying educated and informed on all of that information. So that's going to wrap up this little introduction into our hurricane series. Next video is we're going to start off with the 1900 hurricane of Galveston, that some estimates say that there were 8,000 lives lost, and there are some estimates that say that there were upwards of 12,000 lives lost. So that is still one of the deadliest natural disasters to ever hit the United States. 12,000 people, potentially 12,000 people lost their lives in a hurricane in 1900 on Galveston Island. So until the next episode, I hope everyone stays safe, and we'll see you next time.